Greetings, greetings. This is Kinesiology 236, Chapter 11. Still talking about the trunk and spinal column. We left off with this GIF here, and I was pointing out how as she's going through lumbar flexion, notice how the low back articulates, right? And she goes from a lower dotted curve to a kyphotic curve, and how even just by standing and having her hands above her head, she's already in a bit of kyphosis up in the shoulders, and she has some anterior flexion. If you want to look back to the previous slide, that's cervical and capital flexion in the neck. So again, the spine is so interconnected, you can't help but have one movement affect another. Same thing with extension. Whoa, stretch the abdomen. I will say this, for many of your clients who sit and stare at screens all day, this type of activity and this type of activity, perhaps laying back over a Visiball, are life-saving for them because this whole front side of the chain is so short and so tight from sitting all day. Just to lay back and open up on a ball is amazing, and be able to stretch like the musculature up front, sternocleidomastoid, as you'll see, and scaling some of their muscles. It's fantastic. But what I want to just point out is the same thing. She's doing cervical and capital extension. She also has a little bit, as much as she's trying, she has a little bit of that extension there. She's going to this lumbar extension. She's really got a bunch of it going on here. Okay, right cervical, lateral flexion. I'll have clients do this exercise to stretch SCM. Specifically, I'll have them do this, ear to shoulder, then I'll have them look with their left eye up over their left ear and look and rotate. Try it. If your neck is stiff, try that as a stretch, either ear to shoulder. You go right ear to shoulder, then turn the head and look up over the left ear. And believe me, you'll feel that up in this area of the neck and up in this area of the trap. And with this, what I just want to point out is as much as she's trying, she's still getting a little bit of pelvic tilt here, even though she's rotating and trying to do everything in the spinal column. Same thing here, cervical reduction. So now she's just going from ear to shoulder, back to upright. She's going from a here we are, over here, position, lateral flexion, to being upright. Just a return to movement. So you can just imagine now axis and atlas in the base of the skull, how they're rotating here. And she's actually going beyond what should be normal range of motion here. And you can see that reflected here. Watch as she turns to the right, that shoulder will come around. It tells you that she's going beyond the actual range of motion of atlas and axis in the base of the skull, because she's gaining a little bit of an advantage here. All right, little compensation pattern. And as she's rotating here, same thing. She's rotating, going beyond, and you'll see the hips start to come around as well. Right, so she's going beyond the actual limits of her her back, not limits, but she's actually rotating beyond her spinal rotation. She's bringing in some trunk rotation, some lumbar rotation. So you got some thoracic rotation, some lumbar rotation, and a little bit of hip shift as well. Right? So as you evaluate people, and believe me, I don't do a lot of FMS screens and stuff like that anymore. I'll just have people talk and walk with me, and I'll evaluate if they have compensation patterns like this or compensation patterns like this, and that's more telling than any FMS screen I've ever done in my life. I'm going to breeze through this in terms of the muscles, but erector spinae is a biggie, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the pictures and the name that muscle part coming up. And erector spinae actually has different components to it. And when you look at them, they actually come up and they branch out into different regions in the upper back. Now, QL, and you look at quadratus laborum, that guy and iliopsoas and psoas, when they all come together to the party, they ruin the party, because those guys, when they show up and there's some kind of issue with them, they usually cause some kind of low back dysfunction. I'm going to go ahead and just breeze past this. This is okay. It's all right. You'll see some of these here and name that muscle. Go ahead and get through that. Okay, and this definitely has test question all over it. So all thoracic muscles are primarily involved in respiration. Boy, if that doesn't have test question written on it, I don't know. You may not have to name them, but that would definitely be a true or false for thoracic muscles. I'm going to just leave that for a second so you can take a note. Got it? There we go. And Further, when you look at this, all of your abdominal muscles go from bone to bone. No, they do not. They actually go from what's called an aponeurosis, or a fascia-like material in the abdominal area. There's a line of fascia that runs down the center of the body called linea alba. Linea alba, not to be confused with Jessica Alba. The biggies, though, that you'll have to know for muscles that move the head will be trapezius, the upper fibers of trapezius, splenius capitis on the backside. From lateral sternocleidomastoid, we saw a little bit of that with that gal who was bringing her ear down to her shoulder, although it was a little bit passive because she had gravity working in her favor. Muscles of the vertebral column will be erector spinae, absolutely. We'll talk a little bit about these, but not focus a ton on them. SCM, sternocleidomastoid, and quadratus laborum. That's another one that most people are super tight on QL. You just have to find ways to stretch QL as well as psoas and iliopsoas. Psoas and major and minor, there it is. I'm just going to go back one, because if you look at these, like if you try to talk about multifidus and some of the other muscles that run the entire spinal column, it's difficult to actually work those or stretch those. It's tough to get people to really understand how those work, and it takes a really talented physical therapist to get somebody to fire either one of these. Not easy, not easy, let me tell you. Scalenes, it's another one people are mostly tight, and then diaphragm and intercostals for breathing. Muscles of the thorax, think in terms of the thorax region of the body. Okay. I left all these up because you're going to be questioned on these. You're going to have clients ask about internal, external oblique and how they all work, and how does serratus anterior tie into this, and how does that tie into external oblique, and believe me, you're going to field questions on this in your practice. So with core training, and the book notes this, and I agree, you know, so often people don't focus enough time on the midsection, and everything, frankly, connects from the south to the north in the body and the north to the south across the pelvis and the lumbar region. And if a person is not strong enough, they can't transfer force from their feet on the ground in a closed chain exercise through their body to be able to throw a ball, to jump, to perhaps curl a bar, etc. So when you look at this, the two most vulnerable areas, and I mentioned this earlier, they have great mobility, but and as a result, they're not super stable. It is the cervical area and the lumbar region. And I mentioned when you have people try to roll themselves out on the lumbar or the cervical area, it drives me nuts because they are literally asking to injure themselves unless they've had any kind of training on how to use that tool. So concerning the midsection, just think about it. What do you have south of the rib cage? All you have is your spine and the muscles that are there. And so to that end, those muscles have to be super strong to help not only transfer force, but be able to stabilize the spine. So TVA, transverse abdominis, wraps around the body like the belt. People call it the body's weight belt. And if you're sitting, go ahead and stand up and do a slow, controlled exhale and exhale and exhale, and keep exhaling until it kind of hurts, and then start pulling your belly button into your spine. Exhale some more until you can't exhale anymore. In bodybuilding, that's called a vacuum. And what you're doing is you're engaging TVA, and TVA can be used as a pre-contraction in core work. So if you lay on the floor and do the same thing and pull the belly button into the spine, exhale a little bit, engage TVA, and then go ahead and work rectus abdominis by doing your crunches, you'll have a noticeably different crunching experience when you bring in TVA first and then do your crunches. And try that with a client. Believe me, they'll notice the difference and they'll appreciate it. This stuff I'm just going to breeze over. This I'm going to breeze over. The nerves I'm not too worried about, because really when you look at the diagram that they have in the book, it's all of them, because the spine includes the entire central nervous system and connects to the peripheral nervous system, so it's all of them. So I'm not going to focus too much time on this. And as I go into the muscles that move the head, I'm not going to stress too much about the specifics here, but what I want to get into is this. This is a front or anterior view. These guys right here are usually tight on people. And then you'll have, outside of sternocleidomastoid, you'll also have trapezius. I'll do it on this side so you can actually see SCM, sternocleidomastoid. and then trapezius here. Those are usually the tightest and the ones that require the most soft tissue work in your people. Occasionally, you might have to kind of dig in and work on everything up here in the clavicle to try to get SCM to loosen up a little bit, depending how long this person is sitting in front of a computer. On the back side, splenius capitis is a biggie, and that's this guy right here. And then you look at levator, that's also a biggie that gets tight on people, and trapezius, which we've talked about at length many times. So when you look at SCM, this just gives you an idea of where it actually attaches on the manubrium, where it runs up into the skull here on the mastoid process. You can just imagine seated, head forward, how this gets short, and people have to stretch that. Further, you look at splenius capitis and cervicis on the backside of the head and the backside of the body, excuse me, and where that attaches and originates from, right? So you have originate and attach, and it's used in extension and lateral flexion. But the thing is, you look at this and you look at these two, and you can kind of differentiate. The big difference you have here is, well, splenius cervicis actually attaches more to the spinal column, whereas capitis, so named capital, like the top or top of the chain, like the head, to the base of the skull. And so if it's on the mastoid process, the occipital bone, and a person's working on a computer all day, both capitis and cervicis might have to be worked. And by worked, I mean soft tissue work. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and breeze through this. We talked about this a little bit before when I was mentioning multifidus, and to work these would be kind of difficult. So this is a posterior lateral view. So this is the posterior side of the spine here, and these are the bony processes on either side of the spine, which are referred to as this transverse process. You have a spinous process back here. Got it? So when you look at these, just imagine trying to work on somebody who has dysfunction in this area. Incredibly difficult to get to, but for some people, they need that work. I tried to break this out for you so it's easier to see. You have serratus posterior superior and serratus posterior inferior. It's a lot like serratus anterior. Serratus, so named like a knife blade, a serrated knife blade. If you look at a mountain range, you might have like Sierra Nevadas, named Sierra like serrated because they're jagged. And then, but they've done a good job of showing these both on the inferior and superior aspect. And then further up, you look at this series of muscles. And I often talk about this when I look to talk with people about doing Olympic weightlifting and posterior chain work. You know, if it's the semispinal, semispinalis, however you want to pronounce it, or erector spinae, erector spinalis, if you look at the muscles on the backside of the body, it's not as though it's one muscle. It's a bunch of little muscles that are all integrated together. So you look at how it goes from level to level to level to level up the spine. It's pretty interesting how they're interconnected. So with the musculature here, we'll just kind of breeze through this. I'm not really too keen on this because it didn't really give a good job of representing. What I wanted to get into was this, and this is regarding the diaphragm. So with the diaphragm itself, the diaphragm is responsible for breathing or respiration at rest. So as you pull air in, the diaphragm is contracting. Well, you know when muscles contract, they get shorter. So when a muscle gets shorter and it contracts, what it's actually doing is it's dropping down in the diaphragm region, and it's pulling on the area, and it's sucking, allowing the lungs to suck air in, so it creates a pressure gradient. What I'd like to do is run this video in the next slide or in the next video presentation and just finish out with these. I have like 4 slides to go.